So on that note, we're going to start moving to the next panel, and I'd like to invite Philip and Meagen to turn on their webcams right now, and we'll introduce them in a moment. But both Atlassian and TripActions are innovative companies that are dear to my heart, and in particular, I know both of our speakers today will have a lot to tell you about the ways in which they are innovating through the pandemic. Philip is a particularly innovative thinker when it comes to corporate policy and managing a travel plan. And Meagen, I'm sure you're very excited to talk about the enterprise offering that was announced this week. So with that note, I'll pass to you to introduce yourself first, Philip, and we look forward to hearing about the changing business travel landscape.
Thanks, Daniel. Really appreciate it. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us wherever you are in the world, morning, evening, or somewhere in between. I think what we'll do, Meagen, if you want to give me a thumbs up, is how about we introduce each other, going back and forth, and then we can just jump right in. I cannot hear you, Meagen.
Here. All
there
right.
We go.
There
Perfect.
we go. Well,
Cool.
Definitely excited to be here with you, Philip. You have an amazing background. You've worked in tech for almost a decade. You started out as a recruiter, which gave you the opportunity to develop a unique perspective about how to adapt skills to meet the demands of an ever-changing industry. And then since then, you've been part of product teams, IT teams, and business teams. Philip has worked at Atlassian since 2015 and is currently the chief of staff to the CFO. In addition to numerous other responsibilities, Philip manages travel for 5,000 Atlassians. Very excited to talk to you about that around the world, and has been very involved in the company's global response to COVID-19. Has a BA in political science from Vassar College and a master's in information management and systems from the School of Information at UC Berkeley.
Awesome. Thank you, Meagen. When someone else says it, it sounds a lot better than when you write it out yourself. So maybe hopefully I can return that favor. I'm really pleased to be here with everybody, as I mentioned, and even more excited to be chatting here with Meagen. Meagen spent over 20 years in tech most recently, and currently is the CMO of TripActions. Before that, CMO of MongoDB, and she sits on the boards of some pretty heavy-hitting companies, G2, Terminus, and Reactful. Before joining Mongo, prior to TripActions, she was VP of Demand Generation at DocuSign. Meagen has been named top 25 for B2B marketing influencers. She has advised over 25 different tech companies, including but not limited to Branch.io, Chorus.ai, Sendoso, CoreOS, which was acquired by Red Hat, and a company which was acquired by Cisco Systems, TinyPulse, and Sumo Logic, 7 of which have actually been acquired just in the past 2 years. So kudos to you, Meagen, for your influence and guidance there. Meagen holds an MBA from the Yale School of Management and a Bachelor's of Science in Information Management, in MIS, and a minor in CSC from Cal Poly SLO, local to where we both are here in California. So with that, let me make sure I have everything I need here. Meagen, do you want to kick it off? Should I kick it off? What do you think the best way to do this is?
Yeah. Why don't you start out a little bit talking about the basics?
Yeah, perfect. Great. So as I mentioned, Meagen is the CMO at TripActions, and I think one thing that folks are probably curious about Meagen is how is TripActions dealing with our current pandemic crisis? What are you changing? How are you coping with it to still continue to be a leading travel platform? And generally speaking, I guess if we abstract away from the business, how are you guys doing? How are you feeling in general?
Yeah, so we are a full travel management platform from booking to travel agents, TMC to payments. And when COVID hit back in March, we got very close with our customers. We have over 4,000 customers. We have a pretty active customer advisory board, and we quickly realized we needed to build more product for them. One of the things, as you imagine, as travel started to shut down, they needed a lot of duty of care features. They needed to know who was traveling because they needed to reach out and get them home, and our travel agents helped our customers get everyone home. Then they needed to figure out, before the whole world shut down, it went from Asia to parts of Europe to the US, and so we needed to create reports that they could quickly figure out who was about to travel, communicate to them en masse, get them, cancel all those bookings, and then we needed to allow them to restrict certain locations. So we created functionality where you could restrict continents, states, cities, and then what happened, as you can imagine, is all these travelers canceled all those flights, which we helped them do, but they had a pile, tens of millions of unused tickets. And so then we built reports for travel managers and finance to quickly look at everything unused. Then we built, not only do we build it so they could run the reports to understand the financial impact, we automatically apply it when they start to travel again. So they don't have to worry about tracking it on a spreadsheet, finding those codes or anything like that. So we've tried to make it very simple as we start to recover and travel, that you don't lose the money that you already spent on these unused tickets. And then the other thing about getting back to travel that we built was a COVID dashboard. We hooked into the CDC, Johns Hopkins API, and in real time, not only give it to our travel managers so they can do the restricted countries, cities, states, but to the traveler. So in real time, they know the reproduction numbers. They know the rules of the state, for instance. Is there a quarantine? Do you have to show a test? All of that comes into our booking tool, so they have real-time information. So the engineers have been very busy building, and then our customer success managers have been very busy just helping our travel managers figure out what they need. So I'm curious, how has Atlassian changed its travel policy? You know, what's the status of flying and travel, and what are you thinking about in the return to travel?
Yeah, awesome. An easy one. So the short answer is the core policy itself, and I think this is an important distinction to make, has not actually changed. So we have not necessarily changed the written policy. You know, qualifications for business class flights are still the same. Qualifications for international, domestic, etc. are still the same. Obviously, though, what we have done is layered on, I suppose, what I would call a COVID policy. And part of our global COVID policy includes limitations on travel. So in the beginning, kind of like you mentioned, we were just feeling around in the dark, to be perfectly honest. You know, at first it was like, hey, maybe people shouldn't fly into China. And then it was like, oh, maybe South Korea should be on that list, and Iran and Italy. And I believe there was like a fifth country. I can't quite remember now because it's all kind of blurred together. But what we did do very quickly was, instead of just saying, okay, we got to shut this down temporarily, which was, I think, what a lot of companies did. And Atlassian, for those who don't know, we're not necessarily in the consulting business, so we don't have people flying literally all over the world every day. But I would venture to guess we have at least 2 or 3 people on an airplane every single day pre-COVID. So we are a very relationship-heavy company internally amongst ourselves, and we don't necessarily distinguish between execs and, let's say, junior engineers when it comes to travel. If we think that it will benefit someone to go spend a week or 2 weeks, or even do like a secondment, for example, with a team in Australia, if they're based in Texas, for example, we will go ahead and put them on a plane. So we really are very egalitarian in that way, as a little bit of background. So bringing us forward to today. So today what we have in place is a hard approval process, and not just through our travel booking tool. We actually are asking people to go ahead and indicate or effectively ask for permission to travel before even it gets to a manager level. So there's a small committee. I'm one of the people on that committee, and we effectively assess not just the business case or the ROI, if you will, on the potential trip. We also try to make sure that people understand the inherent safety risks. One of the gentlemen on the previous panel was talking about understanding if you're feeling safe, and just as importantly, feeling unsafe. And so that's one of the things we're trying to call out as well. I think one thing where it also gets very tricky, it seems to have stabilized over the past 3 months, but I think, Meagen, you'd agree, in the first 90 days of the pandemic, the government regulations were changing as frequently as health guidelines and CDC and WHO, et cetera. And that is something that, as a software company, I mean, we're not necessarily in a position to track that in real time. So we've done our best to understand our core markets, and our core markets tend to be where we have offices. What are the current regulations? So as an example, for anyone who's unfamiliar, Atlassian is an Australia-based company, and our global HQ is in Sydney. Right now, even if I wanted to go to Sydney and everyone was okay and I accept the safety risks, I can't physically get into the country of Australia because they still are only allowing citizens, permanent residents, and family members of the same. So we're doing our best to understand what that looks like. Bringing me forward, I think, to the last part of your question, Meagen, how are we thinking about travel going forward? For anyone who was listening to the previous panel, I'm personally a believer that we will get back to our travel. Now, I think it'll be more of a slow drip rather than just the faucet turns all the way on. Because one thing we are also dealing with, which I think a lot of companies are dealing with, is we will inevitably be a more remote company going forward as it relates to our internal employees and where people are working. So the overall landscape of travel, I think, will actually shift a little bit, not so much in terms of more travel or less travel, but the places and the locations we are going, I think, will change. So to offer one example that we're sort of talking through is, traditionally, most people have worked in and around our office hub. So let's just take the US where I'm based, for example. We have offices in San Francisco and Mountain View, 2 in the Bay Area, 1 in Austin and Texas, and 1 in New York. In theory, if a year from now there are 10 people on a team working dispersed throughout the entire United States, well, maybe it actually makes more sense for them to come together for a team offsite in, I don't know, Denver, Colorado, for example, which is not one of our office locations, but could theoretically be the most convenient location for all these people to come in. So in addition to trying to understand where people are going to go so that we can then think about potential policy changes, it also changes the way we work with our suppliers as well. So in general, I'd say there's still lots of unknowns, but we are optimistic that we will certainly get back to things if and when people feel safe, and I think each person in that regard has their own appetite for risk and safety. So I guess, as obviously the pandemic is front of mind for everybody, Meagen, how do you see just the overall industry reacting to the pandemic, and how is it impacting which companies are traveling, who's going where, what have you? Is the transactional business model still sustainable? Do you think we will see a rise of new TMCs, a fall of old ones, combining of companies? How do you guys at TripActions just see the overall travel landscape?
Yes, to all of those, I would say, are happening. I think COVID really showed that the industry was unprepared for a lot that hit. At TripActions, we are one platform, so our booking tool and TMC is one, and so we were able to see who was traveling, where people were at, who was about to travel, all in one place, and react in real time without having to pull information from disparate systems. We are also not a transactional model. We are a trip model, so if you book a trip, you can contact our TMC unlimited times. So it's $25 one trip, and it doesn't matter how many times you need it. So we're not transactional based. And so I think that is going to change in the industry as well. One of the things that I think is also impacting, you do see a lot of consolidation going on right now. And this, to those that are on the call for startups, this is I think a great time for startups. If you can get you do not have a lot of debt. I think as you age as a company, you take on acquisitions, you take on a lot of debt. And if you don't have revenue coming in with travel down, that certainly is going to hurt you as a business. I think if you're agile startup who can build new product quickly, you can keep your cash burn down, and you have enough cash in reserve to outlast this, because we will come out of this. We will come out of this, and those that have built the right product for moving forward will survive it, and it's a massive market. Before COVID, for business travel anyway, it was $1.5 trillion. Even if we're at 50% levels in a year, that's still, $750, $800 billion market of people that need to travel. And we're certainly seeing week over week a steady increase, which we saw until June, and then second waves hit and it kind of flattened out. But we're starting to see the travel come back from a business standpoint. And it's that essential travel. It's executives that need to go and travel. It's the sales, to one of the points made earlier, you're going to go if you have a deal to be made or a deal to be lost. And that relationship, and I think, as human nature, we need to get together. We need to meet. When you break bread or meet with someone and have food and meal, that's something you need to do in a relationship standpoint. And you're not going to give $1 million to someone you've never met. Right? Like, think about software. That's a huge investment. You want to look them in the eyes and know that they're going to be a trusted partner for you. And so I see that coming back. Certainly a vaccine would help. But, we're figuring it out. We're putting safety measures in place. I've done some travel. I have 3 kids. We traveled to the East Coast in June. People become more and more comfortable, and we learn more and more about it. So I have a question for you. We care a lot about the traveler experience and have always focused on a great booking experience and high adoption rates. What will be the expectation of business traveler post-COVID? Do you see a desire to return to be on the road? And what are the new requirements emerging for you?
It's a great question. The short answer to the middle part of the question is yes. My belief is people will return to traveling. I agree with everything you said, Meagen, about relationships, about breaking bread, about looking people in the eye. And I say that as someone who works at Atlassian, which for anyone who's not familiar, traditionally we do not have a big sales team. So a lot of our corporate travel, as I mentioned, is really internal, for lack of a better word. In a different world, maybe I'd go sit in the lounge for 3 hours and not really care about it. In today's still COVID world, maybe I'm just going to kind of hang out at my house for a little bit longer to minimize my exposure, et cetera, et cetera. So in that sense, I think the more information you can provide your traveler today more than ever, the better. As it relates to their core travel experience, that's the icing on the cake. Going forward, though, I think it's probably, and this is something we're still working through at Atlassian, is there something we can provide to our travelers in a literal physical sense? For example, like, is there a, like, if you will, like a little to-go bag that we can send everybody, even in a remote world? Can we send them hand sanitizer, a mask? Can we send them, an extra, like, literal hand soap in a carry-on thing so they can actually go wash their hands if they want to? Things of that nature, I think, are becoming very interesting. I think also companies are looking, or I'll speak for ourselves, we're also looking to provide people with alerting services. So there are companies out there that can really help people in real time based on GPS notifications or location tracking understand, like, hey, we noticed you just got to Manila. The COVID rate there is lower than expected. I mean, again, I'm making all that up, so that's just a hypothetical example. But those are the types of things. So I suppose that's a way of saying I think it's kind of a combination of physical and digital tools that people are going to use in the short term. And then long term, I do agree with the general tone of the previous panel, which is I personally think travel will get back to normal, both in the business sense and the leisure sense. I think that, yes, people have short memories, but I also think if you look at the best analog we have to this whole thing 100 years ago in 1918, I understand that travel was different back then, both from a monetary perspective and an infrastructure perspective, but people still kept going places, and I really do think that that is going to prove to be the case. So let's see, we've got about 10 minutes left, Meagen, so let me, I guess actually I'm curious. I'm going to sort of flip that on you, Meagen, coming from maybe not the coming from the TMC perspective. What are you guys seeing as far as changing expectations in real time from a typical corporate traveler?
Yeah, so they definitely want information. One of the things that we release, not just to customers, but to everyone, is a business travel recovery tool that actually shows you the reproduction numbers of COVID in the region you're going. If you went to TripActions.com, at the very top, there's a link to it, and you can put in the state or the country. So I think information matters a ton. The other thing is, a comment made earlier about the pox vaccine taking 4 years. I have to believe that we've come a very far way on technology and healthcare. I think we can beat that timeline. So I'm actually a little more bullish on the fact that the vaccine will get here at least by winter, and sort of what that means. And I think that if you're, from a business travel standpoint, if you certainly get the vaccine, you're going to be less worried, or if you've already, established your comfort level around that and where you're going. I also haven't seen any major outbreaks on airplanes. So I think, education, there's a huge, they've done a huge investment, the HEPA filters, how it impacts you. So I think as people get more comfortable and read the studies that are out there, it's less, you're more likely to get it at the grocery store than on an airplane. And, and I fully believe that. Like I said, I've been traveling. So business travelers, I think it's education, it's comfort level, and it's the essential nature of the travel. And really our data is showing our business travelers are coming back week over week. They're starting to book more trips and go on more trips. And so we'll continue to support that. So I have a question for you as a travel manager or someone who's orchestrating travel. Do you feel the existing tools you have give you enough, and what more do you need to be comfortable?
That is a great question. And as a side note, I totally agree with your point about general safety and studies. I always tell people who I find out are afraid of flying that the taxi cab is way more dangerous than the airplane, but people don't.
Nobody's wiping that down. Well, maybe they are now.
That's a tough psychological light switch for people. So do existing tools give me what I need? Generally speaking, I actually will say yes. I think that most notably, as a travel manager, any kind of traveler tracking is incredibly important to me. And I will say, that's not, for anyone who's unfamiliar, that's not some kind of Big Brother 1984 type tracking. That's just understanding on a map-like dashboard, if you can think of like Google Maps as your UI, pulling up, being able to write a very simple query, even if writing that query is just clicking some configurations, like show me who is in Australia between September 1st and September 15th. And if I can drill down to see where they're staying at a hotel, fantastic. If I just understand they're in that country, that's a good start. So that is incredibly helpful, and I think any travel manager would say that. Going, I guess, a layer deeper than that, if you're then partnering with any kind of alerting company, like I said, or if there's any sort of health and safety partner you might have, international SOS is one that comes up quite a bit. I think Zenner is falling into this category of like in-trip tools, which is something that seems to be an emerging thing, which I think is very, very cool. And then, of course, I think that the big thing as a travel manager, understanding, and Meagen, maybe you can speak to this very quickly, or you did speak to this, quickly a moment ago. Knowing that your travelers have the support they need is incredibly, incredibly important. So, you mentioned the model you guys have, where you can call a customer support person one time or 100 times during your trip, and it really doesn't matter. I think models like that really, really encourage not just getting back to travel, but let's put ourselves 3-5 years from now in a totally post-COVID world. I think that's really the inevitable place where travelers want to be. They want to know that, just like with any purchase, if you will, that they can get on the phone with someone, text someone, send an email, what have you, and someone there is looking after them. So at Atlassian, for all intents and purposes, when it comes to core travel, I'm kind of a one-man team, and I don't think any company really provides internally that type of in-trip support. But I think that's the type of stuff that seems to be continuing to emerge. And if I understand correctly, Meagen, that is something you guys are investing in pretty heavily as well.
We are, and actually we have a traveler map now. At any time, point in time, you can put dates and you'll know exactly where people are or where they're supposed to be, and then pull the report and communicate directly to them. We have a lot of duty of care features, but we do partner with international, or have connections with international SOS and World Aware, all things that I think have really jumped to the top of priority. We used to talk about our product being all about business traveler experience and the best experience, and then nobody was having a great experience with COVID, and now we focus a lot on controlling cost and traveler safety. So that matters a lot. Well, I know we're getting close to the end, and we talked about this a little bit, but when do you think? I was thinking in the year spring we'll get at least 50% levels. What are your thoughts on travel?
I generally agree with that, and obviously I'd say that's more just like gut instinct. I don't have a study to report to. I don't have a doctor in my house. That's just sort of gut feeling. I think that one of the challenges, at least that's maybe unique, well, maybe not, I shouldn't say unique for Atlassian, but is something that we consider is we operate heavily in both hemispheres, which means that flu season is kind of this like ongoing, ever-perpetual cycle. Now, in a normal year, it is what it is. This year, I think it means we not only have to be very careful and diligent during the northern hemisphere winter, but as soon as that's over, that effectively means that it's going to be winter of 2021 for the southern hemisphere. And so I say that not to say that I think that slows things down. I say that to say that if you sort of understand, or if you believe in kind of a second or third wave, or whatever wave you want to number it, winter and fall are probably more likely than spring and summer. And so in that sense, I do think we will see some stuff pick back up. I also think that it's not just about volumes, it's the nature of types of trips that will happen. And you alluded, Meagen, or we've both spoken to sort of, let's call them mission critical or revenue impacting trips is a phrase I've used internally at Atlassian. Those I think will continue, and then I do think you will start to see, they're not leisure trips because they're still corporate travel, but let's call them more sort of like project-based work or brainstorming sessions or relationship type stuff. I think that stuff picks back up in the spring, and optimistically, I would say anywhere between 12 and 18 months from now, I hope we will actually be back in a place where either through vaccine or herd immunity or likely a combination of the two, that anyone who is inclined to travel will be doing so pretty much with the same peace of mind and ease, to be honest, that they were doing prior to the pandemic. And I guess in closing, maybe I will throw it back to you. You know, you guys, we're certainly on different sides of the market, but it is a two-way market. You guys, I know, are a very data-driven company. Can you share a little bit about what you're seeing trend-wise? I know you've spoken about small upticks, but if you look a little bit further out, what kind of predictions do you think are out there?
Yeah. One, to your point on the flu, having 3 kids, went and got the flu shot with my kids, but I'm having a bit of a debate with my husband. He's a physician at Stanford. He actually thinks overall flu may be down because of social distancing, isolation, travel being down. So I hope he's right, but I'm hedging my bet and still getting shots. For that. But yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, we're seeing 50% increase of travel week over week and month over month. So we're definitely optimistic on it. We're, working with our partners, our suppliers, with airlines and hotels. We import data, hotel hygiene, so you can get a sense of even where you're traveling to, what the hotel practices are around. And so, and it's a typical event season right now, right? Most people are expecting to be in events, brokering those relationships, those customer renewals, all those contracts. So I also think after 6 months of this, 7 months of this, why we're seeing sales traveling right now and execs traveling, because we've got big deals coming in. We've got end of year for many companies to close business, and they're gonna be on the road to do that, and they're gonna use all the best practices. But we're certainly seeing that trend.
Awesome. How old are your kids?
I have 11, 9, and 6. So homeschooling is also a kick in the gut right now, but we're making it work.
That's great. Yeah, we have an 18-month-old, so I plan to do the flu shot thing when we take him in for his appointment in a couple weeks. Yeah,
amazing time. 2 of my kids are willing to go get the shot. One is I drag her every year, but she knows it's good for her.
Awesome. Well, this was really enjoyable, Meagen. Thank you so much for spending some time. I enjoyed it. Daniel, are you there to move us along?
I am indeed. So I would like to say a sincere thank you to both Meagen and Philip for taking the time to share 2 sides of the same coin, what it's like as we get people back on the road and what it means to innovate in these definitely interesting times. So Philip